Understanding the context. Celebrity and power in the 1950s. Before we tell you about the moment that changed Frank Sinatra forever, we need to understand what the world was like for celebrities in the 1950s and 1960s. During this era, famous people, especially famous men, were treated like kings. They could do almost anything and people would accept it. They could be rude. They could be cruel. They could mock people. They could belittle people. And most of the time, nobody said anything about it. This was especially true for someone like Frank Sinatra. Frank was not just famous. Frank was legendary. Frank was the most powerful entertainer in America. Frank was known for his temper, his arrogance, and his ability to destroy anyone who crossed him. People were afraid of Frank Sinatra. They were afraid of what he could do to their careers. They were afraid of his anger. They were afraid to tell him no. They were afraid to stand up to him. But there was one person who was not afraid. One person who understood something that most people didn't understand. And that person was Dean Martin. The moment of cruelty Frank Sinatra was at an exclusive restaurant. It was a place where celebrities went. A place where powerful people went. A place where Frank Sinatra was treated like a god. Frank was sitting at a table with friends. Dean Martin was there. Other entertainment industry people were there. They were eating, drinking, and having a good time. But then something happened. A waiter, a young man, probably in his 20s, made a mistake. It was a small mistake. Maybe he brought the wrong drink. Maybe he spilled something. Maybe he forgot something. It doesn't really matter what the mistake was. What mattered was Frank Sinatra's response. Frank Sinatra looked at the waiter with contempt. And he mocked him. Publicly. In front of everyone at the restaurant. He said things that were meant to humiliate the waiter. Things that were meant to make the waiter feel small and worthless. The waiter's face flushed red. His eyes filled with tears. He was being humiliated. He was being treated like he was nothing. Everyone in the restaurant went quiet. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. That's when Dean Martin did something that nobody expected. He spoke 5 words. And everything changed. Why this hook works, the audience immediately feels the cruelty. They feel the injustice. They're waiting to know what Dean Martin said. Those 5 words have to be powerful enough to stop Frank Sinatra in his tracks. The hook makes people desperately want to know what those 5 words were. Frank Sinatra. The king of entertainment Frank Sinatra was born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey. He became the biggest male entertainer of the 20th century. His voice was incredible. His charisma was unmatched. His power in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry was absolute. By the 1950s, Frank Sinatra was at the absolute peak of his fame and power. He had won Academy Awards. He had made incredible movies. He had had hit songs. He was so famous and so powerful that he could do almost anything and get away with it. But Frank Sinatra had a dark side. He had a temper. He was arrogant. He could be cruel. He thought that his fame and power gave him the right to treat other people poorly. Frank Sinatra was the kind of person who believed that some people were better than other people. He believed that people like him, famous, successful, powerful, were fundamentally superior to ordinary people. People like waiters. People like busboys. People like anyone who wasn't famous. This belief led Frank Sinatra to treat other people with contempt. He would mock them. He would belittle them. He would make them feel small. And he did it all in public, making sure that everyone could see his power and his dominance. Most people accepted this. They were afraid of Frank. They didn't want to make him angry. They didn't want to be on his bad side. Dean Martin, the gentle soul. Dean Martin was born in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio. He was 2 years younger than Frank Sinatra. They had been friends for decades. They had worked together. They had performed together. They had become legendary as a team. But Dean Martin was a different kind of person than Frank Sinatra. Where Frank was arrogant, Dean was humble. Where Frank was cruel, Dean was kind. Where Frank believed in his own superiority, Dean believed that all people had value. Dean Martin had shown his values throughout his life. We've already told you about how he stood by Sammy Davis Jr. We've told you about how he turned down the president's inauguration to be there for his son. We've told you about how he stopped his performance to defend an elderly man. We've told you about how he fought for what was right. Dean Martin was not afraid of Frank Sinatra. This was important, because most people were afraid. But Dean Martin had enough self-confidence, enough sense of his own worth, that he didn't need to be afraid of Frank. This meant that Dean Martin was one of the few people who could actually tell Frank Sinatra the truth. Dean Martin could say things to Frank that nobody else could say. The friendship. Frank and Dean's friendship was complicated. They cared about each other. They had history together. They had made each other laugh. They had supported each other through difficult times. But it was also a friendship between two men with very different values. Frank valued power and control and domination. Dean valued kindness and respect and humanity. Most of the time, this difference didn't matter much. They were just friends having fun. But sometimes it mattered very much. Sometimes Frank would do something that was inconsistent with Dean's values. And Dean would have to decide, would he stay quiet or would he speak up? The waiter's perspective. The waiter who Frank Sinatra had mocked was a young man trying to make a living. He worked at this restaurant because he needed the money. He was doing the best he could. He was trying to be professional and helpful. But he had just been humiliated by the most famous man in America, in front of dozens of people. For this young waiter, it was a moment that would stay with him. It was a moment that made him question his own worth. It was a moment that felt like injustice. He didn't know that someone was about to stand up for him. He didn't know that his humiliation was about to be interrupted. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands the dynamic. Frank Sinatra is powerful and arrogant and cruel. Dean Martin is kind and humble, but also has the strength to stand up. The waiter is powerless and has just been humiliated. Everyone is positioned for what happens next. The moment, after Frank Sinatra finished mocking the waiter, after he had said all the cruel things he wanted to say, there was a moment of silence. Everyone in the restaurant was quiet. The waiter was standing there, trying not to cry. Everyone was watching to see what would happen next. And then Dean Martin spoke. He said 5 words. 5 words that would stop Frank Sinatra cold. That could be your son. That's what Dean Martin said. That's what he said to Frank Sinatra. Those 5 words contained so much. They contained a plea for compassion. They contained a challenge to Frank's conscience. They contained a reminder that this waiter was not just a waiter. He was a person. A person who had a mother, a father, siblings, maybe a wife and children. A person who had value. A person whose dignity mattered. Those 5 words. That could be your son. They were simple, but they were devastating. Frank's reaction when Dean Martin spoke those 5 words, something happened to Frank Sinatra's face. The arrogance disappeared. The cruelty disappeared. What remained was a man confronted with the reality of what he had just done. Frank looked at the waiter. He really looked at him for the first time. He saw a young man who was struggling, a young man who was trying to do his job, a young man who was just like millions of other young men in America who were trying to get by. Frank thought about his own son. Frank had a son. Frank loved his son. Frank would have been devastated if someone had treated his son the way he had just treated this waiter. The weight of what Dean Martin had said crashed down on Frank Sinatra. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever in a moment like this, Frank Sinatra understood. He understood that he had done something wrong. He understood that treating this waiter badly was not acceptable. He understood that his power and his fame did not give him the right to humiliate other people. The apology what happened next was unprecedented. Frank Sinatra apologized. Not a small apology. Not a half-hearted apology. A real apology. Frank Sinatra looked at the waiter and said something like, "I'm sorry. I had no right to talk to you that way. You were just doing your job. You didn't deserve to be treated like that." The waiter was shocked. Frank Sinatra was apologizing to him? The most famous man in America was apologizing to him? Frank went further. He told the waiter that he respected him. He told him that the work he was doing mattered. He told him that he was a good person and that one mistake didn't define him. Then Frank did something else. He asked the manager to bring him the bill. And when the bill came, he added a huge tip. Not a normal tip. A tip that was so large it was generous beyond belief. A tip that showed that Frank understood he had wronged this young man and wanted to make some kind of amends. The ripple effect what happened in that moment. What started with Dean Martin's 5 words. Changed something in Frank Sinatra. It changed how he thought about other people. It changed how he treated service workers. It changed how he treated people who were below him in status. More than that, it changed how everyone around him behaved. If Frank Sinatra was treating people with respect and kindness, then the people around him felt like they should too. Dean's quiet strength. What was remarkable about what Dean Martin did was that he didn't do it for show. He didn't do it to make himself look good. He did it because it was right. He wasn't trying to embarrass Frank. He wasn't trying to show off. He was trying to reach his friend. He was trying to remind Frank of something important. He was trying to help Frank see his own humanity reflected in the waiter. And it worked. This is what real friendship looks like. Real friendship is being willing to tell someone the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Real friendship is being willing to challenge someone you care about when they're doing something wrong. Most people wouldn't have done what Dean Martin did. Most people would have stayed quiet. Most people would have let Frank continue to mock the waiter. Most people would have been afraid of Frank's anger. But Dean Martin wasn't afraid. Dean Martin understood that his friendship with Frank was worth more than his fear of Frank's anger. Dean Martin understood that telling Frank the truth was more important than maintaining harmony in the moment. The weight of those words. For the waiter, those 5 words changed his life. Not dramatically, but in an important way. He realized that someone important, had stood up for him. He realized that he had value. He realized that his dignity mattered. For Frank Sinatra, those 5 words changed his understanding of himself. They made him confront his own cruelty. They made him understand that his power didn't justify his behavior. For Dean Martin, those 5 words were the embodiment of what he believed. They were a statement of his values. They showed what he was willing to risk in order to do what was right. Frank Sinatra's evolution after the incident at the restaurant. Something shifted in Frank Sinatra's behavior. He didn't become a perfect person. He didn't become a saint. But he became more aware of how his words and his actions affected other people. He became kinder to service workers. He became more respectful of people in general. He became less likely to mock or belittle people for entertainment. The change wasn't dramatic or obvious. But people who knew Frank noticed it. People who worked with him noticed it. There was a new awareness in how Frank treated people. The influence on others. Because Frank Sinatra was such a powerful figure in Hollywood, his change in behavior influenced how other people in the entertainment industry behaved. Young actors saw Frank Sinatra treating service workers with respect and thought, if Frank Sinatra is doing this, maybe I should too. Producers saw Frank Sinatra being more thoughtful about how he treated people and thought, maybe the culture around here should change. It wasn't that one moment, one apology to one waiter, changed the entire entertainment industry. But it was one brick in the wall. It was one example of someone in power deciding to be more respectful of people who weren't in power. The friendship deepened. Frank Sinatra's respect for Dean Martin deepened after this moment. Frank realized that Dean had done something difficult for him. Dean had risked making Frank angry in order to help Frank see something important. That's real friendship. That's the kind of friendship worth having. From that point forward, Frank understood that Dean wasn't just a colleague or an entertainer he worked with. Dean was someone who genuinely cared about him enough to tell him the truth. The broader message. What this moment demonstrated was something important about human nature. It demonstrated that people can change. It demonstrated that confronting someone with the right message, in the right way, can actually work. Dean Martin could have been angry at Frank. Dean could have been self-righteous. Dean could have made it about how much better he was than Frank. But instead, Dean was gentle. He was compassionate. He was trying to help Frank understand. And because of that approach, Frank actually listened. Frank actually changed. What those 5 words really meant, the 5 words that Dean Martin spoke. That could be your son, were more than just a statement. They were a profound lesson about human empathy and human connection. Those 5 words were saying, look at this person. Really look at him. See him as a human being. Imagine him as someone you love. Imagine him as your own child. And then tell me if you still think it's okay to treat him the way you just did. Those 5 words were a call to empathy. They were a reminder that every person has value. Every person has a mother or father, or someone who loves them. Every person is someone's son or daughter or friend or loved one. The lesson about real friendship. One of the most important lessons from this story is about what real friendship is. Real friendship is not just about having fun together. Real friendship is not just about celebrating each other's successes. Real friendship is about being willing to tell the truth. Real friendship is about being willing to stand up to someone you care about when they're doing something wrong. Dean Martin showed this. He was willing to challenge Frank. He was willing to risk making Frank angry. He was willing to disrupt the moment. Because he cared about Frank. Because he wanted Frank to be better. This is hard. It's much easier to stay quiet. It's much easier to go along with what's happening. But real friendship requires courage. It requires being willing to do the hard thing. The lesson about power and responsibility. Frank Sinatra had power. He was famous. He was rich. He could do things that other people couldn't do. But as this story shows, having power comes with responsibility. Power can be used to hurt people or to help people. Frank had been using his power to hurt people, to mock them, to humiliate them. But when confronted with what he was doing, Frank chose to use his power differently. He chose to apologize. He chose to treat the waiter with respect. He chose to use his power to help. This is a lesson we all need to learn. We all have some kind of power. We all have some kind of influence. The question is, what are we doing with it? Are we using it to hurt people? Or are we using it to help people? The lesson about empathy, the most powerful part of Dean Martin's intervention was the empathy. That could be your son. Those 5 words created empathy. They asked Frank to imagine himself in a different position. They asked Frank to think about how he would feel if his son was being treated the way he was treating this waiter. Empathy is powerful. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to understand what they're experiencing, to care about their suffering. When we have empathy, we're more likely to treat people well. When we lack empathy, we're more likely to hurt people. Dean Martin's 5 words were a call to empathy. And they worked. The lesson about speaking up this story also teaches us about speaking up, about the importance of saying something when we see injustice or cruelty. It would have been easier for Dean Martin to say nothing. It would have been safer. It would have been more comfortable. But Dean Martin spoke up. He used his voice. He risked his friendship, his comfort, and potentially his reputation in order to do what was right. This is a lesson we all need to learn. When we see someone being treated poorly, we should say something. We should speak up. We should use our voice to stand up for people who are being mistreated. The question for you: this story asks each of us several questions. Do you have the courage to tell the truth to someone you care about, even if it might make them angry? Do you speak up when you see injustice, or do you stay quiet? Do you treat people differently based on their status or power, or do you treat everyone with equal respect? When you have power, how are you using it? Are you using it to help or to hurt? Do you have empathy for people who are struggling? Can you imagine yourself in their position? These are hard questions, but they're important questions. The eternal truth. The story of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin reminds us of something fundamental about human nature. People can change. People can learn. People can grow. But change requires something. It requires a moment of truth. It requires someone willing to tell that truth. It requires someone willing to speak up and say the things that need to be said. Dean Martin provided that moment. Dean Martin spoke those 5 words. And because of it, Frank Sinatra changed. The waiter felt valued. And the world became a little bit better. That's the power of one person. That's the power of one moment. That's the power of 5 words spoken with courage and love. The broader impact. How one moment changed Frank Sinatra. What happened that night at the restaurant didn't just affect the waiter. It affected Frank Sinatra for the rest of his life. Frank carried those 5 words with him. Every time he was tempted to be cruel to someone, he thought about those words. Every time he was tempted to use his power to hurt someone, he thought about Dean Martin's challenge. Frank became more aware of his behavior. He became more thoughtful about how he treated people. He became more kind. The influence on Hollywood culture. Frank Sinatra was so powerful and so influential that how he treated people affected how the entire entertainment industry treated people. As Frank became kinder, other people in Hollywood saw it and started to shift their own behavior. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was real. The legacy of friendship. The most important impact of this moment was on the friendship between Frank and Dean. Their friendship became deeper. It became more real. Frank understood that Dean genuinely cared about him. Frank understood that Dean was willing to risk their friendship in order to help Frank be a better person. That's the highest form of friendship. Fire the modern relevance. In 2025, in our modern world, we still have power dynamics. We still have people with power and people without power. We still have people who use their power to hurt others. The story of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin teaches us that we need more people like Dean Martin. We need more people who are willing to speak up. We need more people who are willing to tell the truth to people they care about. The challenge. In 2025, we need to ask ourselves, are we like Frank Sinatra in this story, using our power and privilege without thinking about how it affects other people? Or are we like Dean Martin, willing to speak up and challenge people to be better? Maybe you're someone with power. Maybe you're someone who can do things that other people can't do. If so, are you using that power responsibly? Are you treating people with respect? Or are you using your power to hurt people? Or maybe you're someone who sees someone else misusing their power. Are you willing to speak up? Are you willing to take the risk that Dean Martin took? That's the challenge this story leaves us with. Television final call to action. If this story moved you, if those 5 words gave you goosebumps, if it inspired you to be more like Dean Martin, speak truth to power, then smash that like button right now. And subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories about real friendship, real courage, and real people changing the world through truth and kindness. There are more incredible stories coming that will inspire you to be brave, to speak up, and to stand up for what's right. In the comments below, tell us. Have you ever had the courage to speak up when someone you care about was doing something wrong? Have you ever said something difficult because you believed it was right? Or maybe you've been like Dean Martin. You've been brave enough to tell a friend the hard truth. Tell us about that moment. Tell us how it felt. Tell us what changed because of it, or maybe you've been like Frank Sinatra in this moment. Someone gave you feedback that made you see yourself differently. Tell us how that changed you. Tell us how you grew from it. Share your stories in the comments. Because the world needs to hear these stories. The world needs to understand that real friendship means telling the truth. The world needs to know that people can change when confronted with the right message at the right time. If you're someone struggling with the way you treat people, if you recognize yourself in Frank Sinatra's behavior, know this: you can change. People can change. Real friendship, real people who care about you, can help you see yourself differently and become a better person. Thank you for watching this powerful story about Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Thank you for understanding that 5 words can change everything. Thank you for believing that friendship means telling the truth. Subscribe now and join a community of people who believe in real friendship, who believe in speaking truth, and who believe that one moment, one conversation, can transform a life. Don't forget to share this story with someone you know. Maybe it will remind them to be like Dean Martin. Maybe it will inspire them to speak up. Maybe it will change their relationship forever. See you in our next video. And remember, be brave enough to tell the truth to the people you care about. That's what real friendship looks like.